It was the reception job was so bad. I was willing to drive 35 miles through downtown LA to quit that job and move into working in grocery.
Wow.
And so, I did that for a decade.
Hey, Islanders, and welcome to episode 199 of the Camano Voice. Today I speak with the owner and founder of Brandi York, Fine Art, and Random Geekery. Please welcome, you guessed it, Brandi York. Hi, I'm Brandon Erickson, and you're listening to the Camano Voice podcast, where I interview local business owners, comedians, singers, and more. I dive into their backstory to find out how they got where they are, what are some of the tips for you to do the same, and find out where they are going. Tune in every week as I interview more of the people you see every day. Hey Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camano Voice, where we release a new episode every Tuesday, or at least typically. Hey, welcome back. Hope you guys had a good weekend. We, being my wife and I, got to go to the Jonas Brothers on Friday night, and so that was fun. Got to go see a pretty crazy show, and had a good time there. And my sister got to go with us too, so that was fun. All three of us got to hang out, and it's fun seeing a band from the 90s that is, I guess early 2000s, and that is also they're still popular with teen girls, sort of. The crowd there was really funny. People our age, people older than us, and people way younger than us, all there. So it was pretty fun. The crowd was very diverse, but I had a good time there. And then Sunday, my son and I, who enjoys video games and stuff like myself, we got to go to a tournament, not participate, but just go observe one of a local. At a place in Seattle, and it was for, no one's going to understand what this is, but it was for Smash Brothers Ultimate, which is a video game, and it's a small video game as far as competitive goes, but this tournament happened to be statistically the biggest tournament ever for that game. So that was really cool to be able to go there and see a lot of the top players that I've watched on YouTube and stuff. I even got a selfie with who used to be the best player in the game by far, and now everyone else has kind of caught up to him. So now he's just a really good player. But got a selfie with him, so that was fun. Good time to do that. So had a insane weekend, lots of fun. But I am here on Monday, and I am tired. So that was my weekend, and it's only going to get crazier from here because we are in the Christmas season. Welcome to this. Real quick, I'm going to throw out this date. If you guys are listening to this podcast and you're here on Camano Island or Stanwood, we are doing the tree lighting there's activity starting at 4 p.m. On December 2nd. That's a Saturday. So the activities will start at 4 p.m. Yeah, I think that's what I just said. 4 p.m. There's going to be some activities going on. Santa's going to be here. And then at 5 p.m. we will actually do the tree lighting here at Camano Commons. So come out for that if you can. It should be a good time. We've got Windermere doing the we're doing the coffee. Windermere doing the hot chocolate bar that they're famous for. We've got goodie bags that will be here. Like I said, Santa will be here. And the Loft, the Crouches, will be doing a arts and crafts project. We have a choir coming to sing us through. And and then we have great sponsors this year of the Camano Chamber sponsoring it. Ace Hardware, Ace Camano, is going to be sponsoring this year as well. They're helping us out with the lights, giving us a great discount on them. So we're excited about that. And should be a good time. Be sure to come out for that. This episode, I get to speak with Brandi York, who is a self-proclaimed geek and also the founder of Brandi York, Fine Art, and Random Geekery, which we talked about in the podcast a little bit. She's like, I thought it would be a good name, and now it's very long. But had a really great conversation with her, and I guess that actually, the video game talk I had earlier about the tournament leads nicely into this because we talk a little bit about video games. So if you guys get lost during that part of the episode, you can feel free to jump ahead a little bit as we get into some of those pieces that maybe some of you guys won't appreciate as much. But had a very fun, interesting kind of story of how she got into art. How she got into all these different things and how she eventually got to where she is now, as well as some of the big projects that she's completing or just completed, and all that's coming up. So she's it was a lot of fun to talk to. Love always talking to a fellow geek. And so without further ado, here's my conversation with Brandi York. Hey, Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camano Voice. Today I'm here with the owner of Brandi York Fine Art and Random Geekery. Welcome to the podcast, Brandi York.
Thanks, Brandon. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, so before we get started, tell us a little bit about Brandi.
Brandi is a geek. I mean, that's really a lot of it is I never outgrew that whole, liking TV shows and cartoons and video games and all of that you're supposed to grow out of as an adult. And now a lot of us have not grown out of it, and I can make my living doing this.
Yeah, man, that must be, because it must be something like if you could go back in time and tell your younger self,
oh, man.
Hey, don't worry,
You're not going to be an outcast forever. It's fine. It'll be fine.
So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Southern California,
Okay.
Right down the street from Disneyland, actually.
Okay.
So, I had an annual pass in the 90s when it was actually an affordable thing to have.
Yes.
It wasn't, a car payment every month. If they even, I don't even know what the status on those anymore is, but yeah. I spent my weekends at Disneyland.
Nice.
And, kind of rough childhood situations, so that was my escape.
Yeah,
and
that's a great escape.
Yeah, it was. Friends of mine, we'd go and we'd sit at Disneyland and draw.
Yeah.
I know that sounds like a ridiculous thing to do, but that was our escape, and it was fantastic. And
yeah. One thing that always stands out to me about Disneyland, especially now that I work in a retail environment, is the attention to detail and the amount of work they put into that to make every part of it feel magical and special and new without you even knowing it.
Yes.
Like the cleanliness, the way they have all of their staff members there but not there, and every piece of it is just it's mind-boggling to think how they get to that level.
Yeah, and I worked there for 6 years.
Okay.
In college and after, and it's very much like the whole mindset is it's a theater production.
Yeah.
Like they refer to the main area that the guests are in as on stage.
Okay.
So it is a stage production.
Yeah.
And it's on stage and backstage, and so everything they don't want you to see stays backstage. And, people talk about, the tunnels under Disneyland. It's like, no, that's Disney World. Because they learned from Disneyland that they didn't like seeing people in certain, Frontierland costumes walking through Main Street because it kind of broke that little bit of immersion.
Yeah.
So that's why Walt Disney World has a bunch of the tunnels, so people can move from one section to another in their various, outfits that they wear for those areas that they're working in without breaking that immersion. And so there's a lot of thought that goes into that mentality of how do we immerse people in this fantasy-esque setting without breaking that. And seeing the janitors walking around and the people cleaning the bathrooms and the things that have to be there.
Right.
And the people that have to be there to do that. But how do we make that as unobtrusive as possible?
Yeah.
And so, I actually learned a lot about how to present myself and my work by working there.
Yeah, I can imagine there's probably not a better place to learn that from.
That and customer service.
Yeah.
There was a very high expectation of how you handled customer service.
Yeah.
So, it's definitely frustrating when you go into Target and, it's not that level of customer service anymore.
Right. Well, and I love that they do the thing where it's the people that are sweeping and cleaning, randomly, then they decide to start drawing on the sidewalk with water. And so then you get, they start drawing this picture. And so you're sitting there watching. What it reminded me of Because I used to go as a kid. My dad did some work, or his business did some work for Disneyland, so we got barter trade with them, and so we got to go pretty often. And so as a kid, it's just like you just go and it's like a thing you do.
Right.
But when I went back as an adult and was watching everything and seeing everything, I was like, man, there's so many different things they do. What it reminded me of is, and I can probably talk to you about this because you would know, is like open world games that are very well developed.
Yes.
Where like, you know what the main quest is, but you get 2 minutes down the road and some event happens. And so you get sidetracked and you end up spending another hour following that side quest. And you're like, oh, wait, what was I doing again?
You're talking to someone who has spent the last 2 years very heavily into Final Fantasy XIV online? Yeah. Yeah.
And so, like, but it's like a real life version of it. Like,
Yeah.
you're like, oh, we're going to go to the Matterhorn. So you start heading that way, but then you run into, like, someone's like, oh, we just saw Gaston over there. So we're like, oh, well, I guess we're going to go see that. Let's go there first.
Yep.
And then you're doing this, and then you're like, where are we going again?
Uh-huh. Yeah, oh, yeah. No, that level of detail and just, like, all the different things to look at and all the different things that are not meant to be a focal point, but once you start paying attention, like I'm assuming it's still this way because it was this way for 50 years, but down Main Street, they had all of these facades of like, you had the storefronts, but then there would be this second level facade with all these different windows with business names. All of the names on the street, on the windows, were people who had been involved with the development of Disneyland.
Okay.
And so just little things like that, like it just looks like, oh yeah, you're walking down, this 1890s, 1900s, boulevard with all these little businesses. Okay, cool, yeah. Until you start really paying attention and start looking, and then you start going down that rabbit hole of, oh, wait a minute, who is this person? Like, this name's familiar. Why is this name familiar? Oh, they helped do this part of developing Disneyland or building Disneyland or whatever. So
Yeah, it's very cool how they've done that. And my wife, who is a perfectionist, she was like, before we went to Disneyland, she's like, she grew up, not well off, and was like, Disneyland's like the thing that all the rich people go do, and it's like, it's dumb, it's just a stupid thing you go to. She's like, I've gone to carnivals, I've gone to theme parks, and she's like, I don't want to do it. Like, it sounds dumb. And when she went, she's like, I thought I would hate it because it's like, it's so commercialized and all that. But she's like, everything was clean. Like, every single light bulb was on.
Yep.
And they will literally shut down a ride to change a light bulb and then turn it back on. Like,
I mean, a lot of the rides go through a lot of major maintenance just on a regular basis. And then they check everything every morning. And so, it's wild. Yeah. It is absolutely wild. I started in the parking lot, and people would ask me, oh, you work at Disneyland? Do you know so-and-so? I'm like, well, what department? Oh, they're, overnight custodial. I'm like, no, I work out in the parking lot. I would never see them. I'm sorry.
Right.
It's like, there are literally tens of thousands of people who work here.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, well, that's great. So then what brought you up to the Pacific Northwest then?
So after my husband and I got married, he was finishing his undergrad, and we kind of had that realization of, we can't afford to live here. Like, we weren't making $100,000 a year independently. Like, that just wasn't a thing. I was working at Trader Joe's. He was finishing up his undergrad. He was working at Disneyland at the time. And it's just like, this is just not going to happen. We're never buying a house down here. So we had some friends up in Eugene. Okay. And we'd been up to Portland in 2005. And we're like, wow, this is really, really clean. This is really nice. And, of course, this was 2005, and we were comparing it to LA. So, take that for what it's worth. But so I started looking into doing transfers with Trader Joe's, and the Eugene store said, yeah, we'll take you. Okay. So we wound up in Eugene for about 8 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. What was your husband doing then?
At that time, he was a cashier for the portrait and caricature stands at Disneyland. Okay. Which I had eventually moved into doing that. I did portraiture and caricatures. Okay. Yeah. Which, you want to talk about trial by fire? Like, you have somebody sit down in front of you, and you have 30 minutes to draw them. Go.
So, in that scenario, like, you have some training, and do they? Do they
offered some training. Like, obviously, you needed to know how to draw face going into it. They couldn't train you from scratch. Right. But they wanted you to have some knowledge in both pastels and watercolor because they worked with both mediums, depending on, it was pastels for portraits and watercolor for caricatures.
Okay.
At that time. And so, like, you had to have some training, you had to show a portfolio and all of that. And so when you get in there, they would do the training of, okay, here's how we shortcut to get this done in this time frame.
Yeah.
Here's how we handle a child that is not going to sit still long enough. And I'm not even kidding. We'd tell parents, it's like, okay, it's 30 minutes to do this. And they would turn to their 3-year-old and say, honey, can you sit still for 30 minutes? I'm like, lady, do you think your child has any concept of how long 30 minutes is? Because I can tell you what the answer is right now. So, yeah, it was definitely a challenge sometimes, where you would just like, and it's not only are you trying to draw a child in 30 minutes, you're trying to draw a child in a very overly stimulating area of all these people walking by and all this music and this noise, and there is no way that child is not doing, head bobbing every which way up and down, left and right. And so they would train you on like what tricks can you use to grab the pieces that you needed to get down on paper as fast as possible while you had the kid's attention for the first 30 seconds.
Right.
So, yeah.
Very cool.
I mean, and some adults were just as bad, so.
Right. Yeah. Very cool. So then prior to that, were you doing art and stuff like that when you were in high school or junior high and stuff? Okay.
So I'm kind of one of those, people say like, oh, when did you, start drawing? And people are like, oh, ever since I could pick up a pencil. I was more junior high.
Okay.
I drew off and on through school, but it was actually, and again, I'm going to date myself, when Beauty and the Beast came out in the theaters.
Okay.
I was in junior high. And I went and saw it with my friends, and I got the soundtrack, and I was listening to it after school one day and decided to start drawing the cover.
Yeah.
And it kind of clicked of like, oh, I can kind of do this. And so I think I drew that cover about 50 times.
Okay.
Before I started moving on to other things, and then started like actually taking classes at school. And all through high school, I had the same art teacher all 4 years, which was fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, by my senior year, I had, the high-end art class first period, and then they put me on yearbook. They wanted me to be the graphics editor because I was the only person who knew how to turn on a computer. Hello, 90s. So they had to make stuff up for me in between. Yeah. Because there was only I had 1 or 2 classes I had to take.
Yep.
But they still had to keep me there all 6 hours or all 6 periods. So they're like, well, you can TA for your art teacher the second period and just keep drawing. And then we're going to make up this other random art class that doesn't actually exist for your 5th period. And so, so by my senior year, I was in her art class for 4 hours a day.
Wow.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. So then, you had this experience with Disney and you were doing some work. And you were working at Trader Joe's at the same time? Or not at Disney, but then you transitioned into Trader Joe's?
I transitioned into Trader Joe's. So when we got married, it was kind of one of those, I couldn't keep working doing the portrait job. Mm-hmm. Because my husband was finishing school and we needed health insurance and all of that. And it's like, I'm making $6 an hour plus commission as a lead. This is not going to work. Right. So I had to go and get a quote-unquote real job. That lasted all of 3 months as a receptionist, and I hated it because it was one of those I had nothing to show for my work at the end of the day. Yeah. I was answering phones and putting things on calendars, and I had nothing to actually physically show for 9 hours at work every single day. And so at that point, I started kind of looking around and watching the website because a friend had said, oh, Trader Joe's hires sign artists and hires artists. And I'm like, okay, all right. So I found a store up in just north of L.A. at that time. We were down south of L.A.
Oh, wow.
It was the reception job was so bad, I was willing to drive 35 miles through downtown L.A. to quit that job and move into working in grocery. Wow. And so, I did that for a decade.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. So what does that look like? Because I think most people think of Trader Joe's as the grocery store, not as the art signs.
Yeah, and so when I went in, I had gotten hurt on the job when I worked at Disneyland. So I have some restrictions, which I went in saying okay, here's what I got. I'm applying for this job. I can do this job. But so I didn't do stocking particularly. I didn't work registers or any of that because of the injury. So it was, what a lot of people don't realize is that every single price tag in a Trader Joe's is written by hand in most stores.
Wow.
Yeah. So especially, and granted, it's been a decade since I left, but even when I still get down to the one in Everett, that I notice that that's still the case. Is
wow.
A lot of them, they are still written by hand. All of the big signs over the end caps are all done in store.
Okay.
That is not stuff that came in from corporate. That's not stuff where they would tell you, okay, here's what this has to look like. It was whoever's in the store, they all have a lot of their own autonomy, so they can say, hey, we're coming into pumpkin season, so let's do, a pumpkin display with these 3 products.
Yeah.
And so, the person who would handle the ordering of those products would get in there and order that stuff. And if they were really nice, we'd get more than 2 hours notice, because that happened a few times. Hey, we're changing this display. Where's the sign? I'm like, you didn't tell me you needed a sign. Okay, cool. This is fine. Yeah, so I worked predominantly in pastels on chalkboard style. We used a different kind of surface paint that actually grabbed onto it a little bit better, and then we could retreat the surface in between.
Okay.
So we weren't like throwing away things every time. We had just like MDF with this paint on it that we would just wash and then repaint and do it again.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a lot of like crash course graphic design training when I was trained as a fine artist growing up. So it's a very different thing. Like, so yeah, it was good. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about like what the important things to bring to a person's attention immediately are.
Yeah.
Like, okay, prices need to be big. People aren't going to read all the time anyway, but you do your best with it, and like you make the prices big, you make the titles big. Here's the product, and you can get color coordination. How do I show somebody that this price is for this item?
Yeah.
If they're just looking at a quick glance and they're not paying attention to, there's a juice and there's some nuts and there's all these different items. It's like which is which. So it was a lot of just kind of figuring out, what's the important information that needs to get across.
Yep.
What art can I utilize that will grab somebody's attention to see it?
Yep.
And I've noticed that a lot of them have gone away from that, and I think that's more corporate than anything else at this point. But when I was doing it, they used to tell me, this is not an art gallery. I'm like, well, you gave me a piece of paper, okay? Like, you gave me a 4-foot by 6-foot piece of board and some pastels. There's gonna be some art in here. So I would find ways to like, this piece of art works into this, and it will catch a person's attention, and so they will then look at the sign.
Yeah.
And that was a big piece, is when we first moved to Eugene and I was able to transfer to that Trader Joe's, the regional manager there was, treat this like a billboard. Okay. Billboards are big pieces of art. Like, think about a billboard. It is one big giant photo with minimal words. Because if you're doing 70 past this thing, you don't want to be stopped trying to read it. So, and then they'd tell me, no art. I'm like, but you told me it was a billboard. So, it was a little bit of a battle sometimes, but it's like people pay attention to the art.
Yeah.
And so I did some big mural projects for the store. One of the big ones was we did a series of 6-foot by 8-foot chalkboards that were all based on photos from Eugene from the late 1800s through to like, I think it was 2007.
Okay.
At the time. And one of them was an old fire truck with a bunch of the old firefighters from like the early 1900s. Yeah. There was an intersection in Eugene from the 1960s. And people would come up and ask to talk to me and say, that's my grandfather in that painting. That looks so amazing. That's so cool. Or like, I worked in that building in the 60s when, they just built that. And so like, it was intended to be stuff that really resonated with people who had been in Eugene for a long time. It was fun to kind of be able to flex those muscles too, of like actually getting to do art. Yeah. In a job that's supposed to be kind of artsy. And they're like, no, just write things. Yeah. Just write things.
Yeah. Well, and what you're saying too about the style of doing it and connecting the dots, like what you're talking about, that's so that took me a while to get, and I'm still getting it, but in retail, people don't read.
No.
So it doesn't matter what you say. They don't look at it. They're going to ask you the same question over and over.
Yep.
And then, two, like, you have to do what you were talking about, that subconscious connection, because your subconscious brain works faster than your processing brain. So your brain will subconsciously connect these dots and say, yep, these go to this. Perfect. Got it.
Yep.
But if you have to read to make that connection, they're never going to get it, because they read the first word, the last word, and then that was it. And I was like, oh, that didn't make sense. What?
Yeah.
Okay. It doesn't. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that's where color is a big piece of that.
Yeah.
Is color coordinating things so that, okay, this cranberry juice is this color, so I'm going to make the price for that the same color. I'm going to make it that cranberry red, and give it some accent or something to make it pop up a little bit more.
Yeah.
But like using that mentality of connecting colors, people will make that association much faster.
Yeah.
And that was always kind of one of those things to argue with people who were like, oh no, just make all the prices red.
Right.
It's like, but then you're not differentiating and letting people know this one is this price and this one is this price. Although we had one time, my friend was working the demo station, which was right across from this end cap that had a 6-pack of beer and beef jerky, and both were $4.99. And somebody apparently picked up the beef jerky, walked over to the demo station. I see the beer is $4.99, but how much is the beef jerky? Like, you do your best.
Right. Yep.
The foot tall $4.99 wasn't quite enough.
Right.
So,
exactly. Yes.
And we all do our best, and I've done it. I have
Absolutely, yes.
I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, because I have absolutely gone into a store and looked at something and then gotten up to the register, and I'm like, that's not what I thought it was.
Right.
Did I do that wrong, or did somebody not have the right price tag on it?
Yes. Yeah. No, for sure. And I'm now more aware of that when I'm looking at stuff in a retail environment of like, before I ask this question, let me just make sure that they didn't think ahead and put a sign that says like this. So I like look around, I'm like, restrooms that way.
Right?
I see they put a sign there, or like whatever it is. And because we all are moving so quickly, we don't really take in information that we see.
Well, and especially in a retail setting where there's so much stimulation and there's so many different things going on and so many other people moving around at the same time, plus noise, and plus maybe somebody's got a 3-year-old who's having a full-on meltdown, and like, I just need to find the bathroom. Where's the bathroom? I need to get to the bathroom. It's human nature. We're going to miss things sometimes, and I try to like take that step back and go, okay, I missed this. I'm not going to go yell at somebody else.
Right.
Because I missed this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not that I tend to go yell at people anyway, but
So then how did you transition what did you do once you left Trader Joe's?
So we had just moved up here.
Okay.
Up to Washington. We moved to Arlington. My husband had finished his master's degree.
Okay.
And we decided that we needed a change, and he wasn't getting very much work down there. So we had friends up here who were like, we're turning people away left and right. So we sold our house and lived with some friends for about a year in Arlington before we kind of got our feet under us. And so when we made the move, I said to my husband, I'm like, I'm not transferring. This is my turn. I'm going full-time freelance artist.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, we're doing this. So, so that was in 2014.
Okay.
And at the time, I had started working a couple years prior with a company that unfortunately is no longer in business, but it was Imagination International, who was the distributor for Copic markers in the U.S. and Canada.
Okay.
And Copics were kind of like the creme de la creme of markers.
Okay.
And so I started doing work with them. I was doing demos and teaching classes and all of this because I was doing like heavy realism with these markers.
Okay.
And most people knew them as either people doing anime and manga drawings were using them, or people doing scrapbook were using them.
Okay.
Like nobody was using them in a full fine arts capacity.
Yeah.
And so I had like taken that as a challenge. And I'm like, no, let's see what we can do here. And so I was doing a lot of demos for them, and I was doing store demos, and I would go with them to different Comic-Cons and do demos at shows. And I would always like, okay, how far can I push this today? And so I was doing like full portraits, like fully rendered, full value portraits in marker.
Nice.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that helped kind of carry us through until he was able to get more established in the area and get his client load up. And then I was getting my feet back into selling at conventions.
Okay.
Because I had stepped out of it in 2008 when the recession hit.
Yeah.
And, I was at a show in Texas with 12,000 people, and I barely made my expenses for the show. I'm like, oh boy, here we go. Yep. Here it comes.
Yep.
So I had done a couple more shows in the Northwest into early 2008, and I was just like, this is not viable anymore.
Yeah.
So so come 2014, I'm doing this stuff with Copic, and they're sending me to shows, and I did this little show in Spokane. I did a bunch of demos for them. We did a bunch of panels, and the show just said, well, here, have an artist alley table when you're not doing the demos.
Yeah.
And so I was like, all right. So I just had some of my stuff printed up, and it was selling.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay. I think it's time to have a conversation about getting back into doing this, because like Marvel was really getting into its stride at that time. Yep. MCU was up. Like a lot of those things were starting to fall into place where geeks were starting to rule the world. And and we all had money now to buy these things and to spread that around. So it was just like one of those, okay, all right, let's test the waters and start applying for some local shows and see. And the first show I did back was not local, but it was down in Southern California. So I could stay with my mom. It'll be fine. It was horrible.
Oh, no.
It was so bad. That was, I think to date, that is still the only show I've actively lost money at.
Oh, no.
And then I come to find out after the fact, oh yeah, no, you should never do that show. That show's really bad. Where was that information like 3 months ago?
Right.
Now that kind of information is more readily out there. But, in 2014, early 2015, there were some resources for people doing conventions, but nobody ever really thought about, oh yeah, my entire living is based on selling at conventions and things like that. And so it was like, oh, this is just a side gig. It's fine. But yeah, I started doing a bunch of smaller shows up here and kind of getting back into it. And so then I dipped into Rose City Comic Con down in Portland in 2015. And it's like, okay, all right, we're getting there. We're starting to kind of get settled. And it took a while for me to really settle into what I was selling.
Yeah. So for our listeners then, obviously you're bringing fine art to it, but what kind of paintings, what kind of art, what style, what things do you kind of focus on when you're doing these?
Oh man, okay, so back then, I'm going to preface this with back then.
Okay.
Because I think all artists go through this. When I was in high school, my art teacher was very adamant, learn every medium you can. Get your hands on every medium. So I was trained in pencil, charcoal, watercolor, oil, acrylic, oil pastels, markers. I think the only thing I never really touched was airbrush.
Okay.
Just because of the equipment involved, and in public schools in California, that was not really a big thing. And I had kind of dabbled in digital art in mid 2000s.
Okay.
I had one of the old school Intuos Wacom tablets that you would draw on the tablet but look at your computer screen.
Okay.
Which is a real disconnect for a lot of people very up front. And it's like, yeah, you'll get there, but it takes some getting used to not looking at what you're drawing.
Right.
And so when I started doing conventions, it was a little bit of everything. It was a little bit of pencil, a little bit of color work, a little bit of digital. And when I was dipping back in 2015, it was a lot of portrait work, mostly in Copic, because I was doing a lot of work with Copic. So I'd be, making prints of these pieces and selling those. I was getting more heavily into Art Nouveau.
Okay.
Which people kind of know the term, but very much the late 1800s, early 1900s advertising style is the best way to describe it.
Okay.
It was Alphonse Mucha kind of invented this style on the fly. It's kind of a fascinating story if you ever go digging into it. But it's a very organic and fluid and decorative. And I've always loved the style, so I started playing with it a little bit. And so I'd have this crazy amalgamation of different art styles and mediums and subjects. And one of the other things, because of doing the work with Trader Joe's, I also got into doing chalkboard typography.
Right.
And like doing quotes and things like that. And so people would come up to my table and I'm like, so which artist did this? Oh, I did that. Oh, and which one did this? I did that. Wait, did you do all of these? Like, people couldn't grasp that one artist could do a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And so over time, I finally kind of just paid attention to what was moving, what were people buying, who was my demographic, who am I catering to, I'm catering to myself as much as anything, but like, who is buying what?
Yeah.
And I finally narrowed it down, and a couple years ago just went all Art Nouveau.
Okay.
Running the gambit from, and all digitally currently, partially because of the intricacies of the line work, and partially because I have cats who get into everything. So I'm challenging myself in the next couple of weeks because I'm going to be breaking out some paints for a new project. But so yeah, anyway, it took me a while to kind of settle into like we're going to go all Art Nouveau for everything.
Okay.
Which is very time consuming.
Okay. Yeah.
So, people ask me, well, how long does this take you? And I said, like, anywhere from 20 to 60 hours on average. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Some of the pieces are really, really heavily intricate and highly detailed. And, it takes a while to get this stuff done. And, yeah, I mean, I love the way it looks, and it's definitely bringing that fine art aspect into it.
Yeah.
But it's all geeky subjects.
Right.
It's Dungeons and Dragons, and it's video games, and it's, popular TV shows and things that I can make work in the style. I don't shoehorn everything in. But,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how does that work? Because it's something I've always wondered, just because the trademark world and all of that stuff is really like crazy, and I'm like, I don't understand
area.
it.
Yeah.
So how does that work when you do subjects from trademarked things or different things? How does that all work?
I try to either work with things that they have written into their intellectual property rights that we're allowed to.
Yeah.
Things like Critical Role, which, if for people unfamiliar, it is a web series that is, and I quote, a bunch of nerdy-ass voice actors playing Dungeons and Dragons. They've had a really huge Kickstarter a few years ago. They've launched into animated series of their campaigns and all of that. But they acknowledge that a lot of their early success was based on the fan artists and the fans doing art of their shows.
Yeah.
So they wrote into their IP rules that as long as you're not mass producing things, go for it.
Okay.
Other areas are a lot more gray, and a lot of the properties don't care until it becomes an issue.
Okay.
I don't touch Disney. I don't touch Warner
absolutely,
Brothers. Because they do care. But like I've done some Neil Gaiman stuff, and Neil Gaiman is all about the fan art. I had friends who were very, very into Our Flag Means Death.
Yeah.
And wanted me to do fan art. I'm like, guys, I don't have an HBO login. And they're like, here's my password. Gay pirate art? Like, so it's just kind of like one of those, like, it's definitely walking a line sometimes.
Yep.
And if I get a cease and desist, then it goes away.
Yeah.
I actually just applied a new piece to be officially licensed by the author from a book series that I've been reading again. So we'll see. That's going to take a few months to get into place. But like, I wish more companies and more authors and people would do that, because then like I'm happy to give you a percentage.
Right.
So that I can continue to do this thing that is my love and my adoration, and like I spend 60 hours on a piece of art because I love what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Whether it's the characters or whether it's my own creation or whatever. It's walking a fine line, and it's hit a point in the last decade or so, especially as Comic-Cons have gotten so much bigger and a lot of these companies are very invested in their properties in these Comic-Cons and such, that with an exception of a few, most companies don't seem to go after fan artists at this point, because it's like if anything, we're helping promote their stuff.
Right.
That's not to say they won't
Right.
in the future, and if that happens, then we deal with it. But
typically, though, it sounds like from what you're saying, they'll usually write a cease and desist before they do any sort of legal of any sort of big thing. So it's usually just stop, and you're like,
it's
okay,
like, please stop.
Yeah.
And that's been it. Like, and I've only had a couple, and they've been random. I had some Princess Bride quotes.
Okay.
That I got a cease and desist. Like, don't sell those quotes. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Like.
That's funny.
Cool.
Yeah. The that's really interesting. I know Nintendo's another one of those ones that is to its own detriment multiple times done cease and desist, and they're like, so we're promoting one of your games as a main stage event, and you're telling us to stop doing that.
Yeah.
So like they do some really dumb things.
And, and like, and from the cultural side of it, right? Like, it's very much about we're all in this because we love this property,
Right.
we love this product, we love this thing that you're making, and this is how we show our love for it, and how other people also show their love for it.
Yeah.
And we're making pennies by comparison.
Right. Yeah.
Like, and so, and yes, when you get into the black and white of it, it's not mine to be selling.
Yeah.
Yes. But I'm not the first, I'm not the last, and most companies are like, it's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Very cool. What parts or series are from Neil Gaiman have you?
Good Omens
Okay.
Predominantly. There's the word.
There we go.
Wow. Yeah. It's been a week. I did David Tennant and Michael Sheen.
Okay.
Sitting side by side with, their wings, but done in stained glass behind them.
Okay.
And then Michael Sheen, Aziraphale, has just a little cup of tea in his hand. And, Crowley has the apple in one hand and a tumbler glass with some amber liquid in the other.
Yeah.
So just kind of I like to build some symbolism into my pieces, as well as just like not just be here's this character. Like I got heavy into floral symbolism a couple of years ago, and while that piece in particular doesn't have floral symbolism built in, a lot of my pieces I'll find like, what's a good flower? What's the meaning that matches this person or this couple of characters, or things like that. And that's a lot of fun to kind of like puzzle piece these things together, going, okay, if I'm doing this character who's very much like his entire story is he's doing everything because of the influence that you had on him over time. Like, okay, this is a good flower. Thou art my life. Yeah, that's a good one. Like, just things like that are fun to build in.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then did you end up doing any of our Flag Means Death?
I did.
You did?
Yeah, I did. I got one out last year. And it's just Steed and Edward.
Okay.
The problem with Art Nouveau is it's really hard to put more than a couple of figures into a single piece.
Okay.
Because after a while, they start getting really small. And when you're into like very heavy line work and detail work, they just get lost.
Yeah.
I did a piece a few years ago that had 6 characters in it, and one of them, even on a 12 by 18 print, she's about 2 inches tall.
Okay.
If that. Like, she's tiny.
Yeah.
And so, like, she gets lost and people don't realize she's in there.
Yeah.
And so, it's just kind of one of those, like, would I have liked to have gotten everybody from the ship on there? Yes. That was just not going to happen. That's just not realistic for this particular setting.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah, that was... we got to go to Comic-Con, the Emerald City one this year, where they have that.
Yeah.
And I think based on what happened and layout and the way they organized it, I don't think they realized how big of a fan following that show has.
Oh my gosh.
Because they did not have enough time for getting up to it, like emptying out the area before the next group came in, and the line to get in was crazy.
Yeah.
And then once people were in there, they were just everywhere. There were so many people.
So many people. That fan base is huge.
Yeah.
And like, I experienced this with Critical Role too, because I've been a fan of them since 2015 when they first started.
Yeah.
And even back then, their first convention appearance that they did as a group in 2016, the show was not prepared.
Yeah.
And so you get these shows that are like, oh yeah, we're going to invite this guest and it's going to be big. It's like, no, you don't understand what you just said. Big does not even begin to cover what is about to happen in this building.
Right.
So yeah, when Reese Darby and oh gosh, I'm blanking on the names of the other two actors that were there. But
my wife knows. But.
Yeah, but yeah, when the three of them the last 2 years, last two Emerald Cities, they've had cast members from Our Flag Means Death.
Okay.
And in both instances, it was insane.
Yeah.
But especially with the actor who played Steed there.
Yes.
It was insane.
Yeah.
It was absolutely insane. And yeah, the celebrity signings were on the same floor as Artist Alley, which was great for us because we were getting all of that foot traffic.
Right.
But it was wild. It was absolutely wild. And
when they did their signing thing, it was,
the number of cosplayers that we saw go by, the number of people. There was a stamp rally, which this is a thing that's new to me this year.
Okay.
A bunch of artists will get together and they'll make a stamp card and they'll have a little map on the back of the card of here's where all the people are. Go do the thing that they require for you to get a stamp and then come back and get a goodie bag or a sticker sheet or whatever. And so there was a stamp rally for Our Flag Means Death at Emerald City this year. People had badge banners, little flags to stick onto your badges. It had different quotes from the show on it. It's when you get those particular shows that really resonate with people.
Right.
And then you get some of the cast there.
Right.
It's going to be wild every single time.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's what's interesting to me right now is I feel like we're in a really weird state in cinema. Obviously, we just got through the writer's strike and the actor's strike.
Well, I think the actor's strike is still going, or did
I think the actor's one is still going. They're still working through that one.
Okay.
But the writer's one was the big one that they were trying to get through.
Yeah.
But what's interesting to me is I feel like, as of late, the movies or even TV series that are succeeding are almost ones that they come out and they explode way past what they expected.
Yeah.
And the mainstays that you would expect to be doing well are really, really struggling. To date, I know Marvel has been doing horrible this year with some really big name releases. This isn't I think it was last year or the year before. There was a kind of a dud year where you're I'm not really looking forward to any of these.
Right.
Some of these ones from this year were supposed to be a pillar, and they lost money on them.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and there's been a lot of controversy around certain ones. There was and I'm really out of the loop on a lot of the TV stuff this year because I've had just a crazy, crazy year. And I can't watch TV and work. Yeah. Because then I don't work. So I have to legitimately set time aside. Yeah. And our evenings of unwinding are usually my husband and I playing our independent video games. Yep. So I just don't get a lot of TV time in unless I specifically schedule TV time. I need to schedule time for Our Flag Season 2. Yes. But and I had to do that for Good Omens Season 2 earlier this year. Right. But yeah, there was a big controversy around one of the big Marvel releases this year. Their opening used a lot of AI. And that's where a lot of the writer's strike and the actor's strike that's going on are also very centered around this big movement in AI now.
Yes, yeah.
And it's huge and it's a problem. And not to say that AI itself is the problem. Right. The problem is that what has built these databases to now write these scripts or create these quote-unquote art pieces was all stuff scraped off the internet without the user's consent or the creator's consent or permission or any of that. So when people think that artists are just whining because, we're going to be out of a job because of AI, it's no, we're not. Photography didn't take us out of a job. Right. We're not going to be out of a job because of AI. The problem is how the data is being sourced. Right. And that's the big sticking point right now. And telling actors, oh, hey, well, we'll pay you a day's wage to scan your likeness and use it in perpetuity.
Right.
Like for a day's wage.
Right.
Right? Like that's a problem.
Well, yeah, and that mindset, what's funny is, because I've listened to, what podcast was, they were talking about it, about that piece, and they're like, you know, it's not, that piece was actually not uncommon in all the contracts.
Right.
Historically, it's always been in there that basically if we film you in a movie, we can use any part of you of that movie at any point in the future for all.
Right.
But we used to not be able to scan somebody and then recreate their virtual likeness
and then
do something that they didn't do in the film. They completely redone.
Yeah,
it's a different meaning.
We're seeing it in a lot of different ways too. Like I follow a lot of voice actors online.
Yeah.
And one that I love, not real known here in the U.S. He's more UK, but he made kind of a vague posting about it. He didn't name the company, obviously, but he said he had to walk away from a voiceover job because the contract stated that they could then use his voice in AI. And it's getting good. It's getting really good. I stumbled across a couple of videos recently, and it's like, oh, did they actually get the voice actors to do this? And it's like, oh no, this was all AI, which means those voice actors did not get paid for this video that this person is now monetizing. Yeah. It's just this weird situation, but it's it's all kinds of complicated, and it's going to be a lot to weed through. And, and it's been funny for me as a digital artist. For years, I have still dealt with people thinking that, oh, you work digitally, so you hit a couple keys on the keyboard and it just makes this image. And I'm like, no, I literally draw this onto a screen into the program. I'm still drawing this, but now we have AI art, and it is literally people typing a few words to generate these images, and then they're submitting it into these big competitions.
Right. I think that was what got it on the map, was when they won that county. I think it was county.
It was a state fair. I'm pretty sure it was a state fair.
Yeah, it was. It was a massive. It was a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
And then when they revealed that it was AI, that's when the world. I feel like it was like. Wait.
And that was right about a year ago, too, just over a year ago, because I remember hearing about it at Rose City last year, which was in September.
Yep.
And, and the guy who submitted it didn't hide it, but he wasn't real open about it either. He said, it was made by Midjourney, which is one of the AI generators. And it's like, but back then, nobody knew what that was.
Yep.
And so,
they're like, great, cool.
Yeah.
You use something, not Photoshop, you use Midjourney, whatever that is.
Yeah, right, whatever that. Okay, cool, yeah. And then the judges were like, oh, well, we still would have awarded it for that anyway. It's like, but you don't really understand what's happened here. Like, he didn't create this. He put some keywords into a generator and then went from there. Right. And using work from other photographers or artists or any of that their work was just swept up. I've seen stuff generated with the Getty Images logo still in the middle of the image. Yeah. Like, I'm honestly surprised that Getty hasn't really gone to town on this. But
well, not to mention, like, a lot of them, some of their I think it's iStock. I don't know. Some of them, when you buy their photo, I think most of them are moving away from this, but I think there's still a couple that do this way. When you buy a photo, like a stock image from them, you don't get that photo. You get it for a time period, but if you don't renew it, they can come back, and that happened on our website. Oh. A photo we downloaded and bought, paid for everything. They came back later like, no, you owe us for this. We're like, why? We bought that. Like, it's purchased. And they're like, no, it's a license, and you only get it for this long time. Like, oh, so we don't use that company anymore. But like,
right.
It's all of them are different, and they write their own contracts. And
if you're not reading that fine print for each and everyone,
but it's fascinating, and they obviously AI is there's so many areas that it's touching, and I know that people are like, yeah, but it's not really, like, we've heard about this, like, the crypto is going to change the world, didn't change the world. They're like, no, but this is different because it's actually going to fundamentally change how things happen. Yeah. Like, I don't know. I know everyone gets the scam calls and the scam emails and stuff. Like, the amount, like, they've always pumped out so many of those things. But it used to be like half the words were misspelled and they spelled your everything else wrong. Now they look real.
Yeah.
And they, when you watch what they can do with, like, we talked about voices, they only need 3 seconds. I think it's 3 seconds. Maybe it's 10 seconds. It's very short.
Yeah.
Where they can reconstruct a very good sounding thing of a voice. So if they get a scam call and they can record up to those 10 seconds, they can then recreate your voice.
Right.
And they already have enough information. They can then call someone else and say, hey, like they did the example of, like, they could have it where they do that to your kid who's 16, then call the parent and have that voice say, hey, Mom, I'm at school. They need my social security number. I don't remember it. Can you get it for me?
Right.
And then 20 seconds later, their identity's gone. Like, all of that stuff is getting so much harder.
Right.
Like, is this fake or real? I don't know.
Yeah, and you're going to be just questioning everything going
Right.
forward. And there are some places where AI is already showing to be amazing.
Yeah.
Like, I've seen some things about, like, okay, this person has these symptoms, and they can feed the symptoms into one of the AI systems that's specifically for, like, diagnosing things, and they'll narrow down what a possible diagnosis is to then hand to a doctor faster than a doctor could go through and do it. So, like, there are some phenomenal areas where AI is fantastic.
And in the scientific medical side, they said they can type into AI, like, give us 5,000 combinations with this or whatever.
Right.
And that is work that would have taken a year to come up with that many plausible possibilities.
Right.
And AI can just kick it out because...
as long as they have been fed the data.
Right.
And that's the questionable part of this, is where is the data coming from?
Right.
So, like, that's the piece of, like, no, we're not all up in arms about AI. We're all up in arms about where's the data for the AI coming from. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where, like, the oversight of it, like... I mean, you look at, like, the attempts at oversight of the internet, which has been around how long now?
Right.
From, like, the government standpoint, is pitiful. Like,
you can't.
It's nothing. And so, like, you're like, there's no hope for the government to be the oversight of AI.
Yeah.
So, like, then it's up to the communities, and it's almost more of like a community stance that has to be done, because we just know that government's never going to catch up to that level. By the time they do, it's way too late.
No, and then, but even then you get into areas of other governments that won't care.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, we even see that today. I mean, I think it's very well common knowledge, but in China, it's not illegal to full on copy things.
Oh yeah, no. A friend of mine did a Kickstarter last year, had a very successful tarot deck that she published, and she had it printed in China. And I'm not knocking printers in China, because I have things made in China, because that's literally the only place to get some things made.
Right.
But, like, within a couple of months, she was finding counterfeit knockoffs on a lot of those websites, and there's pretty much nothing she can do to get that shut down.
Right.
And that's honestly one of the reasons why I went with a U.S. Printer for my tarot deck.
Yeah.
I'm paying a lot more for it,
Yep.
but I'm not going to have to worry about counterfeits, at least not in that same degree of just, the manufacturer decides, let's print 1,000 more, it's fine.
Right.
And go sell them.
Right.
So, and they'll be here faster.
Right. So how did you get started on that project? What kind of drove you in that way?
So I've been reading tarot for over a decade, and a lot of people associate Art Nouveau with the old original Rider-Waite-Smith deck, which is the one that everybody thinks of when they think of tarot. It's that traditional heavy line art, flat color, which I think the artist probably was influenced by Art Nouveau, because it was around the same time frame. So people would see my art and go, oh, this looks like a tarot card, or these tarot cards. And I was like, no. People are like, oh, well, you should do a tarot deck. And I'm like, yeah, it's only 78 pieces of art. This is fine. That's fine.
Which we've already discussed takes you anywhere from 20 to 60 hours.
That's why it took me 5 years to do this deck. And granted, there was a pandemic in there. There were other pieces having to get made, because it's like, well, I can sell the prints of the tarot cards, but somebody's not going to just go buy a print of the Four of Cups unless they have some real deep connection to the Four of Cups. So aside from a handful, I think there's maybe like 6 or 8 prints of my tarot cards that sell independently.
Yeah.
For the most part, it was like I had to be doing other things in between the cards to, keep myself afloat while also getting this project going and off the ground. So yeah, this year turned into nope, that's it. I've got 20 cards left. We are doing this. I'm just going. Okay, I have to do this one other piece though. Okay. All right, now we're back to the tarot. Okay, let's go. Yeah, and so I got it finished in August. I had already been kind of researching who I wanted to have printed, so I reached out to them. Went from the original plan of 500 decks to 1,000 decks.
Wow.
It was one of those, it was actually my therapist who said, is 500 going to be enough? I'm like, oh, now you're making me second guess myself. And I didn't want to do a Kickstarter because I didn't want to pay the 18% in fees and deal with all of that. Plus, that was going to add another probably 2 to 3 months of time in there. It's like I've been kind of squirreling money away for a while, so it was like, okay, we can pay for this outright. This is going to be more than my first car cost, but here we go. So, yeah, so that's in production right now.
Wow.
I'm hoping to hear in the next couple weeks that they're getting it shipped.
Okay.
I had to call my mother-in-law and say, hey, can we drop a pallet in your front yard? Because they are not getting a pallet down my driveway. I live on a hill. It was just like, I've been in contact with the company. I was emailing back and forth with the rep. And I'm like, hey, is this coming on a pallet? Because we might have a problem here if this comes on a pallet.
Right.
So it's like, can I have this sent to somewhere other than my address? Cool. Yeah.
Nice. Very cool. So then what, I think it is, like you mentioned, like there's, people have an idea of it and stuff like that, but I feel like it's one of those things that, like, especially if you grew up in I grew up in the homeschool Christian thing where it's like, that's like satanic and it's terrible.
Right,
so like, can you give a quick, easy explainer of a tarot deck?
Okay, so tarot decks do not tell the future.
Okay, cool.
We still have free will, right? We can, in fact, one of the first books that I remember reading on like how to read the cards was like, you can try to predict what's going to happen, but the problem is you're giving yourself this information. You may now make a different decision based on a card that popped up than you would have without that card. So like, this is not something that predicts the future. The cards, individually, the cards have a couple different meanings built in based on symbolism. And when you start putting the cards together in different spreads and different layouts, they interact, and so like the meanings can shift a little bit. But for the most part, a tarot reading is more about what is happening with you right now. What kind of clarification do you need? You can ask specific questions. You can say, no, I just want a general kind of idea of what's going on. And when you have a good deck and a good reader, and like you have that person who can kind of tap into, the energies if you want to get woo-woo about it, it can really tap into like, okay, here's the general idea of what's going on. And it's not going to say, hey, you're getting into a car accident tomorrow, right? It can't be that specific.
Right.
But it can say like, you've got some big changes going on. You've got some, like, there's a lot of heavy energies and things. Like I've had readings where, so let me back up a little bit here. When people think of tarot, they think of the major arcana. This is like the death card, the strength card, the fool, the world, all of those. That's the first 22 cards of the deck.
Okay.
Those are the big cards. Those are the cards that like, these are huge forces at work. And then there's another 56 cards past that are the different suits, like swords and wands and cups and pentacles. And so each one of those has like different elements and emotions and, or like some of it's, the emotional side, spiritual side, physical side, and intellect side. And so how the different cards lay down kind of determine, if you get a lot of major arcana, there's a lot of big forces outside of your control. There's a lot of stuff happening that you just have zero control over, so buckle up and hold on because there's not much you can do. And I had a friend I did a reading for several years ago. In 10-card spread, she had 7 major arcana pop up in this spread. It's like, oh, honey. She's like, yeah, no, that's right. I have no control over anything that's happening right now. But a lot of it is just kind of guidance. Mm-hmm. It's like saying, okay, so you have this big thing that's happening. All right, well, if I pull this other card and this card is like, all right, so this card is about childhood. Like who in your family can you tap into? Who from your childhood can you maybe call and see, like, or who are you still connected with? Like, or what memories are getting dragged up by these other events that's from your childhood that maybe you need to work on.
Yep.
Like, so there's like different things that the cards have different meanings, but a lot of it is, it's not just saying like, okay, the death card, so something's changing. It's like, cool, what's changing? So then you have other cards to kind of help with that and kind of helps the person sort that out. And I always tell people when I'm doing a reading, it's a conversation. I'm not telling you this is what's happening to you right now. It's like, if this doesn't make sense, let me know. We'll pull another card and see if we can clarify and see if that clicks into something going on in your life right now that you go, oh, okay, so that's what this is trying to tell me, is that my job sucks and I know it sucks and maybe it's time to start looking for a new job. It's stuff like that. Sometimes it's just clarity.
Yeah.
It's just something to help you kind of clarify and go, am I really reading into this really weird, or is this event like, is this thing stressing me out a lot more than it should be?
Yeah.
And sometimes you can pull a couple cards and it'll go, yeah, no, this is stressing you out way more than it should be. So maybe you need to take a walk.
Yeah.
It's just, and every reader's going to read a little bit differently. Like there's no right or wrong way, but it's always something I've been kind of fascinated by, because it's something I've really tapped into, and I would have friends come to me for readings and then find out like a week later, like, yo, that was so on point, that was ridiculous. Like, one friend, I did a reading for her, and it was like, you've got some big changes coming up, there's going to be some movement and things, moving forward in this. She lost her job the next day, and then a week later found out she was pregnant. So, like, sometimes it's just like, it seems, you could go, yeah, no, that's totally a coincidence that those were the cards that came up at that time. But it's like, yeah, it could be. Yeah. But out of 78 cards and the 10 cards that we pulled, that was the message that came through, right? Mm-hmm. And so, you just never know sometimes. And it's kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
So it was definitely interesting diving into making my own.
Right.
But I kept it, so mine is considered a Rider-Waite-Smith clone, which means it's based on the original traditional deck, which most books, if you were to like get on Amazon or go to a bookstore, most books that will teach you how to read tarot are based on that deck.
Okay.
So I have a deck that I have read from for well over a decade that does not have the traditional symbolism. So it was really hard for me to learn what the cards meant and keep in my brain like, okay, this is the Eight of Wands. What does that mean? Because this is not the symbolism I'm used that this book is telling me it should be.
Yeah.
So I went with the traditional symbolism. There were a few places where I kind of deviated based on what I felt I wanted that card to do. But for the most part, but because I'm a geek, it's a tabletop deck. So it's all based around fantasy tabletop RPGs.
Okay.
So like Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder and things like that.
Yeah.
And I slipped some little Easter eggs in because of, I'm a geek. So of course there are little things in there, right? But yeah, it's a full traditional tarot deck that full 78 cards with a booklet that's in pre-order right now, and then we'll hopefully in the next month have them in hand, and I'm not going to know what to do with myself.
Very cool. That's really cool. That's such a cool, such a massive project too. And so I'm sure when you finally get those and you're able to, hold it in your hand, it's going to be very cool.
It's going to be wild.
Yeah. That's awesome. All right. Well, then looking ahead then, what are you kind of looking for? What projects do you have kind of on the horizon? And
oh dear, it's funny, since finishing this deck and getting it into production, I've kind of been floundering a little bit. I've had projects that I've been kind of had on the back burner that I'm dabbling with right now, but I've had friends threaten me with spray bottles that if I started another huge project that they would spray me, treat me like a cat and spray me. I'm like, but I have ideas, I have thoughts, and I have things I want to do. And so I made the joke, it's like, I'm planning this. It's not going to have any kind of like hard, definitive, this has to be done in a certain time frame. But because I have been working digitally so much for the last few years, I've been missing working traditionally. Mm-hmm. And so, again, I'm a geek, and Final Fantasy XIV is my brain rot. Presently. And so sometime early this year, while I was still working on my tarot deck, I started kind of plotting out like, well, who would be a good character from Final Fantasy XIV for the Fool card? Who would be the magician? Who would be the high priestess? And so I just this was just like in the back of my mind for a while. And then I started writing it down. And then I started talking to friends about it. And as I finished my tarot deck and was getting this going, and I'm like, hey, so this is a thing I can work on now. And they're like, no, no. You just finished 78 cards. I was like, it's just the major arcana. It's only 22. So I've been kind of dabbling with that, but I want to work on it traditionally.
Yeah.
I've bought some toned multimedia or mixed media paper and some gouache because I haven't touched gouache in years.
Okay.
And so I'm very excited to get to play with that again because
Nice.
it's been years since I played with gouache. So that's going to just be one of my, I don't have anything else major or pressing going on right now. I'm going to go play with some paints and go work on one of these cards just for fun.
Nice.
And if it becomes a poster in the end, that's probably as far as that's going to get.
Yeah.
Printing a major arcana deck is not really useful in so far as reading for tarot.
Right.
But not to say we couldn't like print cards if people really wanted it, but I think a big poster with all of them on it would suffice. But I'm getting way ahead of myself because that's still 22 pieces of art to get done before I ever get to that point. So
Very cool.
Yeah, aside from that, it's just getting into my next groove, and I'm not sure what that's going to be yet. So
Yeah. Very cool. Well, it sounds like you just accomplished a really big goal, and sometimes it's kind of like when you win a tournament or something. You're just like, now what?
Yeah.
Like, I did the big thing.
No, I knew this was going to happen. Like, I remembered, they always make jokes about after you get married, you go through this withdrawal period of like, I'm supposed to be working on something for the wedding.
Right.
And I'm not. And why am I not working on, because I've already gotten married, so why am I not doing that? And so I knew when I finished this deck, especially because it took 5 years, I was just like, I'm going to go through withdrawals of like, I need to be working on the tarot deck. I need to be working on the tarot deck. And so I knew it was going to come. I'm honestly surprised it took about 2 months to actually hit, but I also had a couple big shows in between.
Yep.
So I was just kind of like, okay, well, I've had other things to keep me occupied, but this last week in particular, I've been like, I don't really know what to do with myself right now. I think I have some things I want to work on, but nothing's really clicking into like, let's go work on this right now.
Yeah.
So I've been dabbling in a few different things and just kind of starting the prep for Christmas.
Yeah.
How is it already middle of October?
I know.
Oh.
Yep. It's that time.
Yeah. So.
Well, very cool.
Yeah.
Well, I like to end every podcast with some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
So what purchase of $100 or less have you enjoyed the most in the last 3 months?
Oh, boy. I can't say I have enjoyed it yet because I haven't gotten to play with them yet, but I'm going to go with that paper and those paints. Like, I'm very excited about those.
Nice.
Yeah. It's been a hot minute since I've gotten to do traditional work. So,
Yeah. Very cool. Who is the most influential person outside of your family in your life?
Okay, this is not wrong, but I'm going to go with Alphonse Mocha because as much as like he's never been a direct part of my life because he's been long since gone, but like his art style has really influenced who I have become over the last 2 decades.
Yeah.
Like what direction I have taken my art and like finding ways to continue to bring that fine art aspect into a geeky side of things.
Yeah. Very cool. This is a fill in the blank question.
Okay.
I know this is weird, but I've always wanted to blank.
I mean, I do so many weird things, so it's really hard to narrow that one down. I mean, I sell at Comic-Cons for a living. Yeah, I mean, I guess. Okay, so when people talk about, where do you go when you go to Europe? Prague is where I want to go.
Okay.
Because that is where Mucha had the biggest influence.
Oh,
and that's where
okay.
his museum is and the family museum and all of that. So, like, when you think in terms of, like, not first destinations for most people when they want to go to Europe, for me, it's Prague.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. Who is an interesting or fascinating person that I should interview next?
Oh, you say that like I get out of my house. And I know people. The joys of being self-employed and working from home is
Right.
you just don't know people.
It's true.
Yeah, I'll have to get back to you on that
Okay,
one.
not a problem.
Yeah.
All right, lastly, what piece of advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Don't underestimate the power of the geeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, like at 20, I was trying to hide this as much as I could, and now I will happily walk around in, graphic tees and, with my pin bag and all of that, going, no, I'm a geek.
Yep.
That's who I am,
Yeah.
and I'm okay with that.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Right. And Islanders, I will talk to you on the next one. Well, a huge thank you to Brandi York for joining me on the podcast today, and thank you for listening. If you haven't already, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps us be found by other Islanders like yourself. And for more information on this episode, you can go to CamanoCommons.com/podcast or check in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.